What are the different kinds of fraud? According to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, there are two classes of fraud. Number one, internal fraud, and number two, external fraud. What is internal fraud? Internal fraud is also called occupational fraud. And this occupational fraud is defined by the word itself, occupation. This is the use of one's occupation for personal enrichment through the deliberate misuse or misapplication of the organization's resources or assets. Occupational fraud is a fraud committed by individuals against the organizations that employ them. Simply stated, this type of fraud occurs when an employee, manager, or executive commits fraud against his or her employer. So remember, when you say internal fraud or occupational fraud, this is the fraud that originates within the entity. It originates from the persons within the entity. So the perpetrators of fraud, of this internal or occupational fraud, are the ones who are employed by the entity itself, and it is committed through the use or abuse of one's occupation. Remember, when you say internal, it originates within the entity. So, sino ang mga gumagawa nito? The employees, the management, or the executive. As long as they're employed by the company or the entity to whom or to which the fraud was committed. How about external fraud? When you say external fraud, this is the fraud that is committed against a company that covers a broad range of schemes. This is the opposite of internal fraud. Why? Because this external fraud is committed by persons or perpetrators who are outside of the organization. Those who are not employed by the organization. And who are these persons? These might be the creditors, the debtors, the suppliers, the customers, and all other persons or third parties, whether connected to or not to the entity. They are committed by these persons, third persons, who are outside of the entity. So, hindi sila employed by the company. The fraud originated outside the entity. Likewise, so it is stated here, dishonest vendors might engage in bid rigging schemes, bill the company for goods or services not provided. So even if there is no purchase of goods, they are being billed or demanding bribes from employees and dishonest customers who submit bad checks or falsified account information for payment or forgery or might attempt to return stolen or knockoff products for a refund. So these are examples of external fraud, and the distinction between internal and external fraud is that in the internal fraud, it is the persons who are connected to or who are employed by the entity who perpetrated the fraud. Whereas when you say external fraud, this fraud is committed by persons who are outside of the organization. In addition, organizations also face threats of security breaches and thefts of intellectual property perpetrated by unknown parties. What are the examples? Examples of frauds committed by external third parties include hacking, theft of proprietary information, tax fraud, bankruptcy fraud, insurance fraud, healthcare fraud, and loan fraud. So here, they included hacking in the example of external fraud, hacking by the persons who are not connected with the organization, but they can still perpetrate fraud. So, hindi lang pala yung mga taong nasa loob ng company ang pwedeng gumawa ng fraud. Pwede din yung mga kahit hindi connected sa company. So, those are the two, again, internal and external fraud. Now, let's focus on internal or occupational fraud. The three major types of occupational fraud are, number 1, asset misappropriation, number 2, fraudulent statements or fraudulent financial statements, and number 3 is corruption. Again, asset misappropriation, fraudulent statements, and corruption. Number 1, asset misappropriation involves an employee stealing or misusing the employing organization's resources. This occurs in the vast majority of fraud schemes. When you say asset misappropriation, there is an unlawful taking of the employer's resources. It is the stealing or taking of the company's property without their consent. So this is asset misappropriation. The asset of the company was taken unlawfully and without consent, and it may have been committed even without force or violence, but with abuse of confidence or with the use or abuse of occupation. So this occurs in the vast majority of fraud schemes. So there is no limit as to the acts that are committed or the overt acts wherein the employee uses these overt acts to commit asset misappropriation. So marami yan. Hindi siya limited. Okay? How about financial statement fraud? When you say financial statement fraud, on the other hand, this involves the scheme or the use of schemes in which the perpetrator intentionally causes a material misstatement or omission in the organization's financial statements. So, in the asset misappropriation, there is a stealing or taking of a property or the assets of the company. Whereas here, in financial statement fraud, there is a misstatement, material misstatement, which is intentionally done by the perpetrator, or it might be an omission. So it may be double recording or non-recording or erroneous recording. So, ang effect nito sa financial statement, there might be or there may be no misappropriation of assets. Pwedeng may misappropriation of assets, pwede ding wala. Pero, ang pinaka-essence ng financial statement fraud is that it is the financial statement that is materially misstated, wherein they make it appear that the financial statement of the company is this wise, wherein in fact the financial statement of the company should have been presented in this wise. So that is financial statement fraud. Now the third category is corruption. This includes offenses such as bribery, conflicts of interest, and extortion. And it falls in the middle of terms of both frequency and financial damage. Ibig sabihin nun, yung dalawa na nauna, si misappropriation of assets and si fraudulent financial statements, mas marami ang nagko-commit noon. Ito, konti lang, corruption. Bakit? In the Philippines, this is a crime. This is a crime wherein there is a violation of the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act. And this Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act has enumerated different violations. And these violations include the bribery, conflicts of interest, and extortion. Okay, so yun, corruption. This might be connected to government accounting. How about misappropriation of assets? Let's focus on misappropriation of assets. This involves the theft of an entity's assets and is often perpetrated by employees in relatively small and immaterial amounts. However, it can also involve management who are usually more able to disguise or conceal misappropriations in ways that are difficult to detect. So again, when you say misappropriation of assets, there is an unlawful taking of the company, of the assets of the company. There is stealing. There is embezzlement. And it might be perpetrated by the employees who are responsible or accountable to the funds or to the assets that has been stolen. It can also involve management who are more able to disguise or conceal misappropriation. So, pwede siyang employee level, yung kung sino yung nagbabantay or nagiging responsible for the taking care of the funds or the assets. Or it can be committed by the management who has more ability to disguise or to conceal the misappropriation itself. Kasi pag management na less ang review, unlike pag employee, mas marami ang review kasi mas marami ang level pataas. Pero pag management, kukunti na lang ang nagre-review sa kanya, yung mga kapwa niya manager or higher level manager. So again, misappropriation of assets can be committed by the employee itself or by the management. And what are the variety of ways wherein misappropriation of assets can be committed? Number 1, embezzling of receipts. When you say embezzling, this is the taking, unlawful taking or stealing of money. Pag sinabi mong is embezzling, pagnanakaw ng pera, hindi resibo ito ha, di ba nakalagay embezzling receipts. Hindi yan yung mga resibo, yan yung mga collections or the amount or the funds of the company. For example, misappropriating collections on accounts receivable or diverting receipts in respect of written-off accounts to personal bank accounts. So, pwedeng physical na pagkukuha ng pera galing sa fund or petty cash fund or a place where the cash is stored or in the vault, or pwede din na transfer electronically. There is a right of accounts from the account of the company to the personal bank of the embezzler or the perpetrator. So, yan. Pag sinabi mong embezzlement, pag nanakaw ng pera yan. What else? Stealing of physical assets or intellectual property, for example. Stealing inventory for personal use or for sale. Stealing crap for resale. Colluding with the competitor by disclosing technological data in return for payment. So, those are the examples. Pag sinabi mong stealing of the assets or misappropriation of assets, it does not denote any value. Kahit maliit pa yan, class, that is considered as misappropriation of assets. The amount, although, of course, we have this what we call materiality or threshold, but the act itself of misappropriating the assets, regardless of the amount, that is detestable. That is very much unethical. You cannot say na, lapis lang naman to eh. O di kaya, paperclip lang naman to eh. The amount is very immaterial. It is very minimal. I can even return it. I can even buy and replace what I have stolen. But that is not a proper justification, regardless of the amount, because the act itself is unethical. Okay? Stealing physical assets, regardless of the amount, is unethical. The same is true with the embezzlement of funds. What else? Misappropriation of assets, causing an entity to pay for goods and services not received. So, anong ibig sabihin nito? Kunwari, meron daw binili na goods. Yun pala, hindi naman natanggap. So, nagbayad. And yung binayad na yun, for sure, maghahati sila nun nung fictitious vendor, or kung wala man talagang vendor, then there was payment on the part of the company when in fact there was no inventory received, then that is also what we call misappropriation of assets or embezzling of receipts or funds through fictitious sales or fictitious purchases. What else? Using an entity's assets for personal use. Ano pa yan? Yung mga office supplies or the valuable assets or whatever assets that the company owns. Using an entity's assets for personal use. Ano pa? Yung the use of assets for collateral or as collateral for a personal loan or a loan to a related party. So, they made it appear, they have secured their loan. Kunwari si Mr. A, nangutang daw siya. Tapos, para makautang siya, sasabihin niya kunwari na, bank, pautangin mo naman ako. Meron naman akong asset to secure my loan. And this is the loan, this is the asset I'm going to offer you. I have a building. It is in my name. The title, the deed of sale is in my name. Or I have a land. The title is in my name. When in fact, that title was forged or there was a falsification with respect to the title or the deed of sale. And that is also what we call misappropriation of assets. Or somehow can be called misappropriation. Kasi, kunwari, wala ka rin naman talaga nakuha, ginamit mo lang as security. But, if you have defaulted on the loan, that property will be foreclosed. And, when that foreclosure will happen, and that is successful, that foreclosure was successful, then, that is now equivalent to misappropriation of assets. Kahit nga doon pa lang sa paggamit as security, it is deemed as misappropriation of assets. Bakit? Hindi ka naman makakatanggap ng loan or makakakuha ng loan sa bank kung hindi dahil doon sa security na pinamukha mo sa bank na sa'yo. When in fact, it is owned by the company. So, that is also one form of misappropriation of assets. What else? Ano naman ang fraudulent financial reporting? Again, this involves intentional misstatements, including omissions of accounts or disclosures in financial statements to deceive financial statement users. So, it can be omission or it can also be erroneous recording or double recording. So, as long as the act itself resulted to a misstatement of the financial report or financial statements, then that is what we call fraudulent financial reporting. It can be caused by the efforts of management to manage earnings in order to deceive financial statement users by influencing their perceptions as to the entity's performance and profitability. Sometimes, or most of the time, fraudulent financial reporting is motivated by the company's desire to make it appear that the company is actually performing, when in truth and in fact, it is not the same as what it purported to be. It may be performing that, but not that much, or not as it was purported. Diba? Bakit ba nila gustong maging maganda ang performance ng company, ni management? Because there is what we call incentive. Most of the time, the performance of the company, the good performance of the company would be rewarded by promotion. So, anong sasabihan ni owners of the company? The stockholders says that management, you have to meet this amount of sales during this year. And if you will be able to meet this, I would give you financial compensation or reward. Or, I will promote the manager, the sales manager. Ganon. So, this is the motivation, the incentive, or the reward that is given to the management. That is why the management is sometimes tempted to manage the earnings. They tweak some earnings or they make financial omissions or double recording or erroneous recording in order to make it appear that the company's performance and profitability is very good, when in truth, it is not that good. Okay? Now, yun na nga, sabi ko, di ba? Pressures and incentives may lead these actions to increase to the extent that they result in fraudulent financial reporting. Such a situation could occur when, due to pressures to meet market expectations or a desire to maximize compensation based on performance, management intentionally takes positions that lead to fraudulent financial reporting by materially misstating the financial statement. So, due to pressures to meet market expectations or a desire to maximize compensation based on performance. So, if the management really wants to make it appear in the market na maganda itong company na ito, it is profitable, so the public should buy shares. So ano gagawin nila? Sometimes they're tempted to make to commit fraudulent financial reporting para maging mabango ang shares or stocks ni company sa public. Or kung may reward or compensation, they are also tempted to commit fraudulent financial reporting. They will make some omission or double recording or erroneous recording in order to make it appear that they have good performance or profitability. So what happens here in fraudulent financial reporting? Sometimes, this is committed by the employees. The employees most of the time, or sometimes, when they have committed a misappropriation of assets, what they're going to do is to fraudulently misstate, or they will do some misstatement in the financial statement in order to conceal the misappropriation that they have committed. So, for example, nagnakaw sila, di ba? Parang kunwari merong nag-deliver na goods, tapos babayaran ni company. Pero totoo lang, wala naman talagang dineliver si company. So, ano gagawin nila? They will make a fictitious purchase. So, they will record a purchase to the disadvantage of the company in order to conceal the fact that they are the ones who receive the payment for the fictitious purchase. O yun. So, example nun, yung fraudulent financial reporting. Ano pa? Kunwari, kung sa sales naman, kunwari may sales talaga. Diba? May sales talaga na natanggap. Pero, ninakaw ngayon ni employee yung sales na yun. O para hindi mapansin ng company na may nawawalang sales dahil siya ang kumuha nun, hindi na niya i-record yung sales. So there would be an effect of fraudulent financial reporting. Kasi hindi na niya ni-record, meron na tayong omission. There is now an understatement in the sales of the company and understatement also in the cash of the company. Ayan. So, yan yung mga examples kapag si employee ang nag-commit ng fraudulent financial reporting. Kasi, what is it for him or her that he would commit fraudulent financial reporting? It might be that he is pressured or threatened by the management, or more so, that he is trying to conceal his fraudulent act, particularly the misappropriation of assets. But if it is on the part of the management who committed the act of fraudulent financial reporting, most of the time, it is, as we have mentioned, based on the intention to make it appear that the company is performing. So there is a misstatement by influencing the perception of the public as to the entity's performance and profitability. So that is what we have mentioned a while ago. Now, fraudulent financial reporting. How it is accomplished. Fraudulent financial reporting may be accomplished by the following. Number 1, manipulation, falsification, including forgery, or alteration of accounting records or supporting documentation from which the financial statements are prepared. So, meron tayong at the very beginning. From the very beginning of the transaction, doon na nakakommit yung financial reporting. Anong ginagawa? There is manipulation or falsification of the supporting documents or the source documents. Instead na 100,000 yung sales, gagawin nilang 10,000 kasi kukunin nila yung 90,000. Or altering of accounting records. Anong gagawin? Buburahin yung sale or buburahin yung purchase or yung inventory or other supporting documentations. There might be forgery of bank statements or all other financial records. So, yan yun. Manipulation, falsification, or alteration of accounting records or supporting documentation. At that level, at the level of the accounting records or the source documents. Ano naman yung isa? We have intentional misapplication of accounting principles relating to amounts, classification, manner of presentation, or disclosure. Ito naman, financial statement level. So, the fraud is at the FS level or financial statement level. Sabi natin na okay naman yung source documents Wala namang fraud doon. Nangyari talaga lahat ng transactions na nirecord. Pero, upon presentation in the financial statements, nagbago. There is an intentional misapplication of accounting principles or upon recording, nagbago. Okay yung source documents, okay yung purchase, yung sales, and all other source documents. Pero nung nirecord na at pinresent sa financial statements, iba na. Nagbago na. Yan yung tinatawag natin na fraud at the financial statement level. Intentional misapplication of accounting principles relating to the amounts, classification, manner of presentation, or disclosure. So, fraudulent financial reporting often involves management of right of controls that otherwise may appear to be operating effectively. As what we have mentioned a while ago, di ba? Paulit-ulit tayo. Sa management kasi, there is that pressure. So, they want to make it appear that they are good managers or they are good in managing the company. Kasi para saan pa na tinawag silang manager kung hindi naman pala nila kayang i-manage or i-increase or i-meet or mag-exceed doon sa expectation ni owners. If they cannot increase the profitability or performance of the company, then they are not good managers. So that is the pressure. Now what they do? What are they going to do? They override the controls and make it appear that the company is operating effectively. So there is fraud. Fraud can be committed by management overriding controls using such techniques as, ano may examples? Number 1, recording fictitious journal entries, particularly close to the end of the accounting period. Yung pasara na yung books o di kaya ay pa-report na para hindi masyadong mahalata or hindi mahuli. Yan yung mga technique nila to manipulate operating results or achieve other objectives. Ano pa? Inappropriately adjusting assumptions and changing judgments used to estimate account balances. Di ba meron tayong mga accounting estimates. And this accounting estimates actually is being deliberated properly. It is being examined prior to application. And if the management would inappropriately adjust the assumptions or change the judgments used to estimate account balances, then that is called fraud. Because what is the effect? The effect would be there is a misstatement in the financial statements. And the intention is for them to have or to make it appear that there is profit or good performance. What else? Omitting or advancing or delaying recognition in the financial statements of events and transactions that have occurred during the period. So what happens here? There was a transaction, there was a real transaction. However, the management opted not to record. They omitted or delayed the recognition. For what? For their own gain. Again, maybe to make it appear that there was profit or good performance. So there is omission or non-recording or delay in the recording or recognition. What else? Concealing or not disclosing facts that could affect the accounts recorded in the financial statements. Non-disclosure. Yan, fraud din yan. Kung may mga disclosure man na required na nakalagay sa notes to financial statements, hindi nila nilalagay. They are concealing it to the expense of the public. They want to deceive the public. Ano mga example niyan? Yung going concern. kung meron na pala silang yung application for liquidation during the year. Hindi nila nilagay doon sa financial statements na they are not in going concern, but they said they are the assumptions in the financial statements is on a going concern basis, pero hindi pala pa-liquidate na pala sila. Then that is fraud because they have deceived the public. Okay? They have deceived the public and making it appear that the company is on a going concern, when in fact hindi pala. So that is the end of the fraudulent financial reporting. Now next would be, we're going to discuss error, and then how is it distinguished with fraud, and then we will discuss the 2020 report to the nations of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners.